The worst state government in the country is the Queensland state government. Yes, there are more arrogant premiers, believe it or not, but the government is terrible. You have 55 days in Queensland to make a decision on this government. And today we got in absolute clarity why Queensland is the worst government in the country. Now, Stephen Miles is the newly appointed Deputy Premier and presumably would like to be Premier should Anastasia dance off after being re-elected in a few weeks' time. And he's out there trying to tell you that economically everything's awesome in Queensland.
What we've seen in the federal government's own figures released last week was that Queensland performed better than other states, particularly better than those states that haven't closed their borders, haven't kept their communities as safe from COVID-19.
But it's not true. You know it if you've been living in Queensland. We know who've been paying attention to Queensland. Before coronavirus, that state had racked up $90 billion in debt. And now they're trying to say under the cover of COVID that it's $102 billion. Why? Because, of course, their borders are shut, which means the amount of money coming in is down. They're also spending more money on their public service, which gets bigger by the week, and all of them are guaranteed to get a pay rise. So while one minister is trying to tell you everything's great, the Treasurer actually explained why you now owe $100 billion in Queensland thanks to the Palaszczuk government.
At a time when we can increase our borrowings without increasing the tax burden, it's appropriate that we do so to support the economy and Queensland jobs.
Bullshit. Getting a higher credit card limit does not mean you are doing anything other than racking up the amount of money someone, somewhere, will have to pay back. Now, despite the fact, exactly, well done, Anastasia, despite the fact that they talk about we need to borrow money to protect jobs, this is the actual record of the worst state government in the country. Labor have stuffed Queensland because the national unemployment rate is 7.5%, but in Queensland, it's 8.8%. So every time they say jobs, they're not protecting any jobs apart from the public service. In the real world, in real Queensland, in quiet Australia, you know you're doing worse than other parts of the country. In fact, almost all other parts of the country. And unbelievably, the Treasurer actually said today, but don't expect the propagandists working for most of the 6 p.m. news or the stenographers who'll write it up and shove it onto the internet or cheer her on because of borders, that the unemployment rate, the Treasurer said today, in his application to be rehired for 4 more years, he's saying that if you re-elect us, the unemployment rate in Queensland will remain higher than the national average. He can't tell us what it's going to be, but he knows they'll have an 8 in front of it, while the rest of the country has a 7 in front of it. This matters because this is real people like you.
Keeping the borders strong has had a good impact on our economy. Yes, there's a long way to go. Unemployment will still be 8% of the June quarter next year, but we are making positive progress.
The June quarter next year? Not until the halfway point of next year does unemployment turn around, and unemployment right now is worse than anywhere else in the country. Yet Stephen Miles, the Deputy Premier, the future Premier, well, he's out there saying, well, we're great for jobs. The Treasurer today says the reason we've got $100 billion is because we're protecting jobs, despite the fact that, I repeat for the 3rd time, more jobs have been lost in Queensland than almost anywhere else in the country. The only other slight exception is Western Australia. The worst state government in Australia is Queensland's. You are faced with a choice about whether to rehire or boot these people for the next 4 years. But the arrogance, they are hiding in plain sight about how arrogant they are. Because when asked by the opposition, are you going to increase taxes to help pay for the increased credit card bill that you have racked up, not to create real jobs, but to cover the feathered nest of public servants, there's no answer. Which is why the opposition can say this today, and it's 100% true.
Now, Labor has failed to rule out any new taxes. Labor has failed to create any new jobs. And Labor has failed to deliver an economic plan.
Now, why have they failed to deliver an economic plan? Because they've said they won't deliver a state budget until after you re-elect them. They won't tell you the real state of the finances until after you re-elect them. But they have said unemployment will remain higher than the national average. It'll be the worst in the country. We'll rack up debt to protect jobs, which is really for the public service. And just to make it crystal clear, the Deb Frecklington isn't verbally anyone. This is the Treasurer when asked, will taxes go up in the next term of the worst state government in the country?
We don't have any intention of increasing taxes or revenue at this stage. I cannot say what the future holds. It's why we can't forecast really beyond 30 June next year.
You can't rule out any new or increased taxes post June 30.
June 30 next year, it's not the current position of the government to increase that. Well, I can't rule out indefinitely what the revenue position might be.
They'll put up your taxes while fewer people have a job in order to pay for the public service, which has received no pain at all during all of this. And when it comes to borders, by the way, they've said that they will open early in 2021. So all the way through September, October, November, December, January, February, maybe this could be the case. They have stuffed Queensland. They want to change the subject because they have stuffed Queensland. Queensland is one of the proudest parts of the country. You have lived the experience of this Premier and this government and the bullshit machine around them for years. You get the chance to punt them in 55 days. And quiet Australians are just like quiet Queenslanders, and there could be one hell of a roar coming regardless of what all of the experts say, because as we said leading into the federal election, nothing is inevitable. And this worst government in Australia I will be highlighting almost every night for the next 55, because guess what? There are more than 55 reasons to punt this mob of losers.